She was a 30-year-old Apache woman who expected death the moment she fell into enemy hands. Instead, a quiet 35-year-old cowboy offered her safety, compassion, and a chance to live again. When her tribe returned, she shocked everyone by defending the man sworn to be her enemy. She wasn't his captive, she chose him, and that choice would change everything. Let's get started. The Apache woman had been dragged across the dusty terrain long before the cowboy ever found her. She had stumbled through sagebrush and thorn, wrists rubbed raw from the ropes that bound her, breath shaking in her chest. Every sound made her brace for another blow or insult, but the men who had captured her abandoned her when another conflict erupted nearby. By the time the cowboy discovered her, she was collapsed beside a dry riverbed, half-conscious, waiting for the kind of end she'd seen too many times. She expected him to finish what the others had begun. The cowboy approached with caution, unsure whether she was alive or moments from death. He noticed her trembling, the tension in her jaw, the heat of fear rising off her like the desert sun. He aired his rifle slowly, careful not to startle her, and knelt a few feet away. Instead of shouting or threatening, he offered water from his canteen, sliding it gently along the ground toward her. It was the first gesture of kindness she had seen in months. She didn't trust it. Not yet, but she didn't push it away either. When she finally drank, the cowboy kept his distance, recognizing the guarded fire in her eyes. Her people were warriors, proud and fierce, and he knew better than to mistake weakness for surrender. He spoke softly, explaining he meant no harm, though she didn't understand every word. Tone mattered more than language. The rancher studied the rope marks on her wrists and the bruises on her arms, realizing someone had treated her cruelly long before he arrived. He felt anger rise not at her, but at the unknown men who had abandoned her like broken equipment. She crawled backward when he tried to help her stand, instinct forcing her movements more than reason. Trust was foreign to her. Survival depended on suspicion. Yet the cowboy didn't react. With impatience, he removed his wide-brimmed hat, placing it on the ground between them as a sign of peace. Then he sat down, showing he had no intention of taking advantage of her weakened state. She watched him with narrowed eyes, trying to determine whether this was a trap or a strange form of mercy. People had used both against her before. As the sun dipped lower, the cold desert night approached. The cowboy knew she wouldn't survive the dropping temperatures in her condition. He gathered dry brush and built a fire nearby, still giving her plenty of space. The crackling flames, flickering light across their faces, making their shadows dance across the rocks. She curled herself as far away as she could while still absorbing the warmth.
She felt something other than fear or exhaustion. She felt confused. Why was this man treating her like a human? The cowboy cooked a small portion of beans and hardtack, placing it on a flat stone closest to her without pushing. He turned away to show he wasn't watching her eat. She eyed the food suspiciously, imagining poison, tricks, or conditions she didn't understand. But her body betrayed her, and the hunger gnawed too deeply to resist. She took a slow bite, then another, tasting no bitterness, only the familiar simplicity of frontier rations. She hated that she needed the food he offered, yet part of her felt gratitude she was too proud to show. Later, when the fire softened into glowing embers, she watched the cowboy wrap himself in a blanket near a large rock instead of coming closer. He gave her the entire side of the heat, choosing discomfort for himself. It was an act she couldn't comprehend. Among warriors, kindness was given only to family or tribe. Among enemies, it was a weakness used for advantage. But here sat a man who broke both rules. She studied him, through the darkness trying to unravel the puzzle of his intentions. People rarely acted without reason. What was his? The cowboy drifted into an uneasy sleep, but she remained awake, her senses alert. Every rustle of wind made her turn her head. Every shifting ember caught her attention. Yet underneath her vigilance, something unexpected stirred, an unfamiliar sense of safety. It didn't make sense. She had been taught that cowboys, settlers, and soldiers were threats, men who brought woundedA, wherever they went. But this one had given her warmth, water, and shelter. She still didn't trust him, yet she didn't fear him the way she feared the others who had tied her down. When dawn broke, the golden rays revealed more clearly the cowboy's gentle nature. Before she had fully risen, he had already gathered his supplies and prepared the fire for breakfast. He didn't bark orders or demand obedience. Instead, he nodded toward the rising sun as if inviting her to start the day on her own terms. She tested her legs carefully. Pain screamed through her muscles, making her suck in a sharp breath. The cowboy stepped forward, offering his arm for balance. She recoiled instantly, instinct tightening every part of her. He didn't push. He simply waited. Eventually, she accepted a fraction of his support, only enough to stand. Her pride wouldn't allow more. The cowboy respected her boundaries, adjusting to her pace. He didn't try to bind her or force her into complicity. Instead, he guided her toward his horse, where he had fashioned a makeshift place for her to sit without being tied. The idea shocked her. Prisoners were always restrained. But he lifted her carefully onto the saddle, his touch mindful of her injuries. She felt a swirl of emotions: fear, confusion, and a reluctant spark of respect. During the slow ride back to his ranch, she
studied the land with wary eyes. The open plains stretched endlessly, dotted with cactus and scattered stones. In the distance, she recognized familiar mountains, lands her tribe once roamed freely. The cowboy sang her longing, pointed toward the horizon, and murmured something she didn't fully grasp. Yet his tone held a softness she couldn't ignore. It was the voice of someone who understood loss, perhaps in ways she hadn't yet recognized. She wondered what shadows haunted him, what pain he carried beneath his calm exterior. When they reached his modest ranch, she expected the atmosphere to shift into dominance or control. But the opposite happened. He helped her down from the horse without gripping tightly, then gestured toward his cabin with an emphasis that surprised her. Inside, the home was warm, simple, and filled with small signs of a man who lived without luxury but with quiet care. A sewing kit rested beside a repaired shirt. A Bible lay near the window. A wooden carving sat unfinished on the table. Nothing spoke of cruelty. Everything spoke of solitude. She stood in the doorway, unsure whether to step inside. The cowboy didn't attempt to pull or drag her. He simply walked in, placing a blanket near the hearth and setting out clean water for her. She hesitated, then slowly followed, drawn by the promise of warmth. The sea. Abin smelled of pine and smoke, a fragrance both foreign and comforting. For the first time since being taken, she let her shoulders loosen slightly. She didn't know what the cowboy wanted, but she knew this. He hadn't harmed her when he easily could have. And kindness, even unexpected, was its own powerful language. The cabin stood in silence against the cold wind, its wooden frame creaking softly as if whispering old memories. Inside, warmth from the small fire flickered across the room, casting long shadows that made the place feel both lonely and safe at the same time. The Apache woman sat on the edge of the bed he offered her, still unsure of her place here. She watched the cowboy kneel beside the fire, carefully stirring a pot of herbs for her wounds. There was no rush in his movements, no force, no threat, only patience, something she had forgotten men could possess. When he approached her, his steps were slow and measured, almost as if he feared startling her. She tensed anyway, her instincts hardened from years of danger, but he simply held out a bowl of arm broth. She accepted it with cautious hands. The scent was unfamiliar, but comforting. As she drank, he turned away, giving her privacy even in such a small room. It confused her. Most men took advantage of silence like this. T-men filled it with demands, with expectations. But he just waited, quiet, distant, respectful. The nights were brutal in the territory. Even with the fire burning, cold winds seeped through cracks in the walls. She pulled the blanket around hers, trying to hide the shiver that ran through her body. He noticed.
Without a word, he added more logs to the fire and gently covered her with another blanket. His hands were calloused from years of ranch work, but his touch was careful. She watched him walk away again, giving her space. Every small kindness disarmed her more than any weapon could have. Her wounds were painful reminders of how close she had come to death. Each night, he washed them with warm water, crushing herbs he had gathered earlier. She expected roughness, but he worked with surprising gentleness. Sometimes, she caught him studying the scars on her arms and back, marks left by people who had shown no mercy, but he never asked questions, never judged, never pried. He simply cared for the injuries he could see and respected the ones he could not. As the days passed, she began noticing the heaviness in his eyes. He carried sorrow like a quiet shadow behind him. Sometimes she saw him staring out the window toward the distant horizon, lost in thoughts he never shared. She wondered what haunted him. A man this gentle did not become gentle without surviving storms of his own. Their silence became a strange kind of conversation. Hers born of suspicion, his born of restraint. But something in that silence made her feel less alone. She had prepared herself for demands. Every time he handed her food or water, every time he tended her wounds, she waited for the moment he would claim what he believed he had earned. But the moment never came. Instead, he kept a respectful distance, speaking only when necessary. His voice had a calm steadiness that contrasted sharply with everything she had known. It shook her trust in her own instincts. For the first time, she was unsure how to protect herself because she could not predict him. One evening, as she tried to stand, pain shot through her leg, and she stumbled. He rushed forward to help her, but stopped himself when he saw her flinch. He raised his hands slightly, showing he meant no harm. She hesitated, then allowed him to abort her weight. His grip was strong but gentle, guiding her to the chair near the fire. For a brief moment, she felt something unfamiliar. Safety, wild. Thought confinement, help without control. It left her breathless in a way battle never had. As her strength slowly returned, she began observing him with new curiosity. He worked tirelessly, repairing a roof, chopping wood, preparing food. He lived alone, that was clear. The cabin bore signs of a life lived in silence. A single plate on the shelf, one pair of boots by the door, a coat patched too many times to count. She wondered who he had lost, who had once filled the empty spaces that now lingered like ghosts. His kindness felt like something practiced through grief. One night thunder cracked across the sky, shaking the cabin. She startled awake, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He turned from the fire where he had been sitting and spoke softly, telling her she was safe. The storm outside raged. Her people murmured among themselves, confused by her defense of this rancher. They had lost many to men like him, and the chief expected loyalty without question. Yet she met his gaze and spoke with clarity. This man had shown more honor in a single evening than others had shown in lifetimes. She reminded the chief that she owed her tribe the truth, not blind obedience. The chief frowned, unsettled but listening. The cowboy remained still, his hands lowered to avoid any provocation, his eyes steady despite the danger. The woman felt the weight of his trust in her. She remembered the nights he sat awake to make sure she survived the fever, how he always stepped back when she needed space, how he treated her with respect that expected nothing in return. These were not the actions of an enemy. These were the actions of a man shaped by grief and compassion. She stepped slightly closer to him, making her choice visible even before she spoke it aloud. Her people demanded to know why she protected him so fiercely. She took a breath and let the truth settle over her words. She had expected death when the cowboy found her, yet he chose mercy. He saw her as a human being, not a prize or an enemy. That mattered more than old grudges. The chief studied her face, searching for hesitation. He found none. The cowboy, hearing her defend him so openly, looked at her with a mixture of pride and humility. He had never asked for loyalty, yet here she stood, offering it freely. The chief dismounted fully and approached her. He reached out and rested a weathered hand on her shoulder, reminding her that she was still one of them, still valued, still loved. Then he asked the question that would decide everything. What path did she choose now? Her heart thundered. She's looked back at the cowboy, remembering the quiet nights by the fire, the unspoken comfort in his presence, the way he never treated her as anything less than equal. She stepped toward him, her decisions spoken without words at first. Her place was beside the man who had given her life, not death. Her people murmured in surprise, but the chief lifted his hand for silence. He reminded them that strength meant choosing one's path, not being forced down a familiar one. If she believed this rancher was worthy, then her choice was hers to make. It was an unexpected gift of freedom, one few ever received. She bowed her head in gratitude, understanding the weight of what the chief had given her. Then she faced the cowboy fully and stood beside him, the distance between them disappearing in a single step that carried more meaning than 1,000 words. The cowboy exhaled slowly, relief softening his features. He had prepared himself to die if it meant keeping her safe. But he never imagined she would choose to stay with him willingly. He felt unworthy of such devotion, yet deeply moved by it. When she met his eyes, he saw not fear or obligation, but certainty. He promised her quietly
Would
that
honor her choice, not claim it. She nodded, knowing. He meant every word. The chief, seeing the sincerity in both of them, finally allowed himself to step back. Her tribe began to leer. Some giving her nods of respect, others confusion, but none challenged her anymore. When the last horse disappeared beyond the ridge, the world fell quiet again. The cowboy turned to her, unsure how to speak, the gratitude caught in his throat. She touched his arm lightly, reassuring him that she did not regret her decision. On. In that moment, for the first time since their meeting, he allowed himself to imagine a future where she chose to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she wanted to. As days turned into weeks, the cabin changed from a place of recovery to a place of shared life. She began rebuilding her strength, tending to the garden, helping repair the fences, and learning more about the cowboy's past. He told her about the sorrow that had shaped him, the family he lost, the silence that had swallowed his home. She listened, her presence easing the weight he had carried alone. In return, she shared pieces of her own story, her own losses, and the resilience that kept her alive. Trust, fragile at first, grew into roots deeper than either expected. The bond they built was not sudden, not dramatic. It grew slowly, like dawn easing over the horizon. They learned each other's rhythms, their fears, their hopes. He admired her strength, her wisdom, her quiet courage. She valued his patience, his honesty, his unwavering respect. They found comfort in knowing neither had to hide anymore. In a land known for taking more than it gave, they had found something rare, a partnership built on choice, not circumstance. The pain of their pasts did not disappear, but together it finally felt survivable. When they stood before the chief months later to formalize their union, the cowboy bowed his head with humility, knowing the honor being granted. She stood beside him, not as a captive, not as a rescued woman, but as an equal partner choosing her life freely. The chief placed his blessing upon them, acknowledging that peace could be built between two worlds if hearts were willing. The cowboy took her hand with reverence, and she accepted it with strength. In a land divided by fear and bloodshed, they became something neither had expected: a bridge, a promise, and a new beginning.